sound older than thunder shook the sky, forming atom from dust. A fragile, innocent, and beautiful creation dawned on the earth. Tasked by their Creator, mighty angels stood watch. They were meant to protect and to be guardians between the barrier of the heavenly and earthly realms. As men grew, so did the observations of the faithful watchers. Samiza, the chief leader of the watchers, noticed the beauty of the daughters of man, and together with other watchers, began to lust for them, craving more than observation. "Come, let us go down and take them as wives." The watchers began a dangerous path. Fearing he would be the only one punished for breaking heavenly law, Samiza bid his fellow angels, those who craved the daughters of men, "Let us swear an oath and bind ourselves to a curse, and together we will take for ourselves the daughters of men. If any of us fail to follow through, let our curse be upon him." Samiza, the chief leader, bid those under his authority to fall. 200 watchers descended upon the summit of Mount Hermon, and there they swore an oath to carry out their plan, binding themselves to a curse, ensuring solidarity. The watchers took for themselves wives, and from these unions the Nephilim were born, hybrid offspring between the sons of God and the daughters of man. These children became the gods of old, the giants of legend. Our elder brothers betrayed heaven and set up for themselves thrones to rule. From the Nephilim, 4 more mighty clans spread into the world: the Anakim, Rephaim, Amim, and the Zuzim. Our worlds became advanced as the Watchers shared their knowledge with kings and kingdoms, and by doing so, man traded to them our birthright of dominion. Man quickly advanced, but advanced in the wrong direction. Man began to worship the Watchers and their offspring. Under the influence of fallen beings and new rulers, man turned towards violence, greed, depravity, and destruction. The earth was ravaged of its reason and its resources. The giants continued, for in their veins they carried the rebellion of heaven and the lust of man. The Nephilim became an all-consuming and destructive force here on earth. Men became their slaves and their food. Hunger drove their depravity deeper. As they turned on their own kind, chaos erupted on the earth. God saw how great the wickedness of the human race and the corruption of all flesh had become, and he saw that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. He bid his servant Noah to build an ark, for no corruption was found in him. Noah did as he asked, and with the first crack of lightning and the first drop of rain, God sealed Noah and his family safely inside. As rain fell and the skies grew dark, some say an angel was sent down with the rain to cut the mighty trees of old that stretched into the heaven. The rain poured from the heavens, and water bubbled up from the earth, gushing from the felled trees. With these waters, the whole earth began to flood. The ark lifted, and death came for all flesh. Yet from the story of Noah emerged a secondary legend, that of the giant named Og, the grandson of Samiza, the one who led the angels to their fated oath on Mount Hermon. It is told Og held on to the ark and refused to let go. His might was so great he survived the great flood. As the waters receded, Og departed from Noah, but helped his descendant Abraham in a time of need, not out of kindness, but out of deceit, for he wished to have Abraham's wife Sarah for himself, and had hoped Abraham would have died in battle. God both blessed him for his acts and cursed him for his intentions. You will live a long life, but you will fall in the hands of the descendants of the very person you sought to have killed, God decreed. Born from antiquity and angelic divinity, Og became the king of Bashan. King Og and his sons were the last of the descendants of the Rephaim, and he was rumored to have lived over 3,000 years, towering over man, giant and powerful, an Amorite king. Known for his strength and for ruling over a powerful kingdom of 60 fortified cities, for all of his might he could not escape the true words of God. King Og was killed by the Israelites under the command of Moses at the Battle of Endrail. The Israelites struck down Og, his sons, and his entire army until no survivors remained. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Until humanity remembers that once giants truly lived, we will remain forever lost to our true origins. Welcome to Rebel Road. I'm Mary.
And I'm Haley. Welcome to this episode of Rebel Road. Buckle up, everyone. We are digging, no pun intended there, but we're digging into the dusty past of humanity and what some may think is into the wild subject of giants. And Mary, I can't get an image of a giant hanging onto the ark out of my head. That's a wild story.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to talk about, and that is the Nephilim. And, King Og is mentioned in the Bible, but that account of how he survived the flood actually hanging on to the ark, that's just a Jewish tale. That's not actually in the Bible. But there's several of them. And one was him hanging off the ark. One was he built an ark of his own and filled that with his friends, the giants. And another one is that the flood only reached up to his ankles, but most likely he probably wasn't born until after the flood. So just, for all you people out there, you don't find King Og hanging onto the ark during the flood in the Bible, but it was just fun and whimsical. So I added that part.
Yeah, I love it. I know you really love to talk about giants, Mary, so let's get into it.
Okay, yeah. When you start looking for proof of giants, you can't just help but see the bits of them everywhere. From the Bible, historical text, historical figures, there's so many people in our history who mention them in their biographies. And of course, you have tales from every nation all over the world. Giants were there. But before we dig in, I just want to take a moment and thank everybody who has taken a moment to review our show, left a comment, and sent a little fan mail. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. In our show notes, if you look at the top and on the website, you'll see a little link that says send us a text message. If you click on that, you can leave us a nice comment or send us a message, and we would love to read them.
Yes, we love mail. I was so excited to see the notes and messages that we got. It was very exciting to see. So if you're listening, send us a little love letter. Mary, it just seems so crazy, but remember back in the 1900s when we would get letters and greeting cards in the mail? I kind of miss that.
Yeah, it was always fun to get that letter that addressed to you. That excitement, like, ooh, what did they say? And the mystery of was it? Did you have a pen pal back then?
I did have a pen pal. It was my brother in prison.
Oh my gosh.
I
had a little pen pal.
Colorful past,
Yep.
may he rest in peace. But yeah, that was my pen pal.
Oh my gosh. But how fun. You just stayed in contact with them. They told you what they wanted to tell, and then you'd recount that to your family and close friends. And that kind of became an oral tradition back then, the retelling of the story of what was told to us in that letter. And I think that kind of holds true with the legends and the myths of giants. It's kind of become an oral tradition in a way, one that people stop talking about. But I do think people are starting to talk about the Nephilim and the giants again.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'll admit, I don't really know too much about giants from like a biblical perspective. I mean, I knew Goliath in the Bible, but I really never understood the background and perspective of Goliath and, where giants came from. Or, I really just didn't even care too much about them. I think maybe what I know more about giants is from maybe more of a conspiracy type theory. And, you and I talking, of course, I've seen photos of what looks like giant trees that were cut down and the architecture with giant doors and arches. If you look at the stairs on the pyramids, those were not built for normal sized men to stride up and down, right?
Yeah, there's no way. Not quite sure, but I think those steps are like 18 inches tall. Can you imagine going up and down stairs every day that were 18 inches tall from step to step? You'd have to be 9 to 14 feet or taller just to make that physically fit, right? The physical evidence as far as archaeology, it's always been there, but we just stopped asking the right questions and we dismissed anything that was too bizarre. Like, oh, they just wanted it to be grand. They just wanted it to be over the top and big. No, I think they were being built for giant-sized people.
Yeah, I would agree, right? When you start digging into the tangible things, not just the oral traditions or the written accounts. It's right there. Giants walked on this earth. And, there might still be a few around.
Yeah, I agree with that. We don't even have to go very far to get into tales of the giants. All we have to do is look here in the United States alone to find several hundreds or thousands accounts of them. In 1933, there in Steelville, Missouri, a boy uncovered an 8-foot tall skeleton while he was digging for arrowheads. There's a photo of the 6-foot man lying next to this 8-foot skeleton, which is just enormous. You might be thinking, well, 8 foot, that's not that tall. But when you add flesh and clothing and hair, yeah, that's a giant. That's a towering giant. My husband, he's a good foot taller than me. He's well over 6 foot. So if you add 2 more feet onto him, I couldn't imagine it.
Yeah, you'd have a hard time fitting through the doorways if he was that tall.
And he complains enough about having no leg room. So could you imagine being 8 foot on an airplane? That's not happening.
Not happening. And, there we have back to architecture and the tall doors that I was kind of mentioning. It's always been there. It's ancient sites built for a taller race, really. But back to the giants in the U.S., you told me to follow the bones, right, while we were doing our research for today's podcast. So I did. And the search for giant skeletons, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of accounts, and most do have photos, way before the day of AI. So it's kind of hard to discount that. There's no way all of these are fabricated or untrue. And Abraham Lincoln himself in 1848 said this after he visited Niagara Falls, and I quote, "The eyes of that species of extinct giant whose bones fill the mounds of America have gazed on Niagara as ours do now." So let's pause there, because this is a respected, educated man who in the 1800s knew what was buried all over America. And so did, I would say, most Americans. So how on earth did we forget this? All of these articles, the images, and we will share some of those photos on social media. Maybe we'll link them in the show notes.
Oh, sure.
But one find that I thought was really crazy came from Catalina Island. Mary, have you ever been to Catalina Island?
I have not, but I've been to California, and it's lovely country there.
Lovely country. I have been to Catalina Island. It's very beautiful. Anyways, back to the story. Between 1913 and 1930, there was an amateur archaeologist. His name was Ralph Glidden, and he had heard about the race of giant, pale-skinned, red-headed giants, and he began to go out and look, and he unearthed and collected. I have no idea if this number is correct, but it was mentioned that a whopping 3,781 skeletons were found.
That's a lot of bones. It is
a lot of bones. And the largest skeleton being 9 foot 2 inches. But he not only found giant skeletons, but a prehistoric stone circle and artifact. So giants did live on that island. And where are those bones? Not only that, but almost 100 years before, in 1833, that's just a few years before Lincoln gave his speech, a 12-foot skeleton was found. And so the story about this, it goes a little something like this. So the soldiers were digging a pit for powder magazine and hit a layer of what seemed to be cement. There's nothing worse than digging a hole and hitting cement. We've been there in our landscaping journeys. But so they hit what seemed to be cement, and they ended up hacking their way and found a 12-foot sarcophagus. And the skeleton of a giant man about 12 feet tall was found inside. And this grave was surrounded by carved shells, huge stone axes, 2 spears, and thin sheets of porphyry. And porphyry is a purple mineral with quartz. And this covered the skeleton. So these were covered with unintelligible symbols, and the giant itself had double row of teeth, both the upper and lower, which is terrifying enough, right? We could just stop right there.
Right.
The soldiers consulted a local tribe of Indians, and the Indians believed that the skeleton was a deity or god, And so the authorities ordered that skeleton and all the artifacts to be secretly reburied. Though they didn't give the bones back to the Indians for reburial. So we have to wonder, did they really rebury them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a wild story. And all that's found in California. California, that's just a hot spot for giants. But you're right. There's so many stories like that. And the articles all claim the same thing. Giant skeletons were found. Some were given back to the Indians. But if we go back to oral traditions, we find giants in Indian traditions and in their legends. So we have the Choctaws, the Nahulu, who were described as giants of great stature. The Sioux have a legend of giants triple the size of humans who were created by the Great Spirit, but they were all arrogant and denied the Creator. So to punish them, the Great Spirit sent a flood to destroy them all. That sounds a little familiar, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the one that's most known and is probably the most famous is from the Paiute tribe, and that is the Sitka giants, who were a cannibal tribe of red-haired giants who would lay traps to capture their people for food. Giants as cannibals. Now, we do see that in the Bible. And, double rows of teeth, come on. But the story goes that the Paiute came up with a plan and trapped the Sitka in a cave, locked the entrance with their warriors, then filled the opening with brush and set a fire. And this fire killed all the giants. And this cave is Lovelock Cave, and it can be found in Nevada. And I don't know how long later, but some men were excavating the cave looking for bat guano and uncovered a giant red-haired skeleton. And later artifacts were found, like 15-inch sandals and split bones that had the marrow sucked out of them. If you're a cannibal, you're going to get that marrow out. And interestingly enough, the entrance to the cave was covered in black soot. So you can still visit there today and you can see the black soot. And they have found more artifacts over the years. But that's just another small example of giants being in our oral traditions and in our histories just here in America.
Yeah, red-haired giant cannibals is to me absolutely terrifying. If we look at all of these articles, all of these old images, the question is, why aren't our museums or history books filled with these accounts?
And that is that $1,000,000 question. To almost all of these articles, when you read them, there's a connection with someone showing up that offers a lot of money for the bones. We see the Smithsonian a lot of times being the people that are taking the bones off the hands of people. And sometimes people just hand them willingly over to the museum for study. But when they go back to get them or pick them up, they're given the runaround. They're never seen again. So the Smithsonian denies that they've ever had giant bones. And then there's that rumored court order in the 1900s that said that the Smithsonian had to destroy any giant skeletons to protect the narrative of evolution. Well, let's just face that. Our normal small sized people, that's kind of going backwards. So I could kind of see where the government would be like, no, this goes against what we're teaching the people, destroy those. But Snopes says, yeah, that didn't happen, but do we believe our fact checkers? I don't know. All we can say for sure is if we go back into the 1800s through like the mid 1900s, there are thousands of claims of giant skeletons being found all over the United States. You can find all those articles, you can find all those old photos, but we have very few bones on display. And some of those cases could have been misidentification, but most people know what a human skull looks like when they see one. And some people didn't hand over their bones and they could have just gotten lost over time through the family. Somebody had given me a giant finger bone, I probably would have been like, ew, I don't want that thing. Let's throw that outside. But you're right. Where are the bones? I know recently the we have that law, the Native American Graves Protection and Reparation Act. Well, that's a mouthful to say. But that was passed in 1990, and that says that bones found and identified as native were to be returned to the native tribes. And I just want to be clear that this is a good law, and I don't like the idea of our resting places being dug up and the dead removed. But sometimes people are moving or expanding. You might dig something up accidentally. But this law also provides a convenient cover story for any future find. It leaves room for an agency to come in, say that they're going to do this in the name of the Native Americans, and say that they're handed over, case closed. But are they really? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're meaning. And giant bones on display would be the key, but then again, people are going to believe what they want. And unfortunately, for most people, if it isn't in an approved history book, say something that's government sanctioned, they aren't going to believe you. And it's hard to get straight truth when corrupt or censored science denies evidence. And sometimes a government dictating a narrative. And I think we've all have seen that even in recent times. If you have a people understanding that giants were and maybe are still around, that changes things. And that changes things in a big way. If you suddenly believe in one thing, then this must be true. And this, and what else have we been lied to, or what else has been forgotten about? And if we keep going, maybe the Bible is real.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you believe in the Bible, and we do, giants lived among men in the days before Noah and the days after. We are in the days after. So it's important to realize not just the Bible, but all those ancient texts throughout the world that talk about fallen angels, the sky people, and giants. It's the collective modern world that has turned its back on real history. Even the Catholics have a giant in St. Christopher. But the problem is that people never learned about them. They might know the story of David and Goliath, but they kind of write that off as an allegory. And so giants, their story fell into obscurity. But giant doors, the megalithic structures, those stone formations that we see all over the world, at all of these ancient sites, all of why it was built or who built it, it's all lost. And we stopped asking real questions and started making up questions to fit a tidy past. Men with chisels, ropes, and fulcrum moved these 10-ton blocks 250 miles and built it in a year. But I think that ancient tech was way superior to anything we have today. And this ideal of how we are so much more advanced, I think that's a big lie and a nod to the arrogance and the ego of men today. And you could ask, why does knowing about giants matter? Well, I'd say it matters because they are a ripple in our shared history and they are woven in the biblical landscape and history of the Old Testament, so much so that we shouldn't discard them. The Old Testament is riddled with giants and these giant clans. They were there, they're a huge part of our history that's just kind of been erased.
Yeah, it's kind of like faith. Sometimes you have to choose to believe, and then it all clicks and everything kind of breaks open. So let's recap the biblical origins of giants for people who may not have caught all of that in the opening story. Okay, so the Watchers, those were angels that God appointed to look after man.
Yes.
Yeah, and the Nephilim are the children born by human women.
Yes.
Okay. And so then the Nephilim are also known by many, many other names like giants, demigods, men of might, men of renown, those types of terms, right?
Correct. Correct. Yes.
So, okay. So, gods of old and humanoid type monsters of legends, those are all giants of some type.
Correct. It just all ties back to the fall of the angels and the Nephilim. And for the most part, and I kind of want to step back, a little bit farther, who's to say that the Watchers actually mated with women? That's a hot topic that goes around and around. How can angels have sex? But how could humans give birth to giants? And this is me just saying this. I think most women probably would have died in childbirth. And there are some legends that say when the giant was born, it ate its mother from the inside out or split her in two. But stay with me on this. There might be an alternative. It could have just as easily been some sort of genetic manipulation with these watchers and human DNA. We don't know the specifics, but we do know the end result. And that's all we have to focus on. And the end result is that these offspring, they grew and then they mated with other giants or humans. And the Bible even mentions all animals. And if we go down that road, then things can get real weird real fast with subspecies, like chimeras and such. But the Bible says that all flesh became corrupt. So that wouldn't be just humans, that would be animals too. So, was to take two of its own kind, meaning no deviance. And I find the verse where it says Noah was found to be blameless, that could mean that Noah's DNA was not corrupt. But, over time with the giants breeding, less and less of that fallen angel DNA mingled. And the giant traits like size, 6 digits, 2 rows of teeth, that kind of thing, think that was found less and less, and so
Yeah.
giants just kind of slowly disappeared.
Yeah, I think that summary could really weird out some folks, but okay, so giants are the product of fallen angels and humans, and they could even be more crazy in appearance than you would think. I know in some of the research I was doing, I was kind of curious and found it interesting that giants were described as having a frightening appearance, and some would be disfigured or have scaly feet or snake feet, which, I mean, that kind of goes back to the serpent in the garden, right? And so
Yeah.
the animal kingdom mix up, it makes sense, but the humanoid giants, they seem to have very similar things in common. The 2 rows of the sharp teeth, the 6 fingers and toes, red hair. Apologies to all of our gingers out there. We love our gingers, but the red hair with beards. Some had black hair and beards, but all of them had pale skin. And, that's very specific. And you find those stories all over the map. And a famous one is the giant of Kandahar. Have you heard of Kandahar?
I do know the giant of Kandar. It's super famous, and I think one of the reasons why it's such a good modern story is all the details that we get. And those details are confirmed by the outside separate source. But some of our listeners might not know that story. So you want to tell it, Haley?
Yeah, yeah, I'll be glad to. Back in 2002, troops were in Afghanistan, and something units did during Enduring Freedom was cave warfare. And they would go in and clear the caves of insurgents. And there was a patrol unit. It was in a very remote province of Kandahar, up in the mountains, when this unit went missing. And when I say unit, what I mean is a team of very skilled elite soldiers. Okay. It wasn't just, a couple folks out there exploring. These were skilled elite soldiers, not the type that would just drop off without radio contact. So they were lost. A second elite unit was sent to the same area to find them. And this would have been like, think Green Beret, SEAL team, Marine Raider type elite. All right. And so these people, they knew what they were doing. So, anyways, they were following a narrow goat path when it led to this entrance of a cave. And the men could see what appeared to be bone fragments, and busted communication equipment, packs from the previous unit. And they knew this was their missing patrol, but they kept going in. And as the men were getting into position to enter the cave, a massive, quick moving humanoid attacked the men. And the account said they had zero warning and it was fast. And this humanoid, the accounts were that it stood at least 12 feet tall. Again, this long scarlet red hair with a beard, and it held a giant spear. And the giant used the spear to pierce one of the team members on the unit and picked him straight up into the air. And that soldier's name was Dan. Dan didn't even have time to react. He was immediately killed. The team starts firing, and we're talking torso and headshots. And eventually they all focused on the head because the giant just wasn't going down. And so after about 30 seconds of constant rounds to the head, the giant went down. And, we're not talking pistols. These folks were full on elite squad, and they had automatic rifles, 50 calibers. And Mary, have you ever been around a 50 caliber weapon?
Yes, I have.
I have as well. And if that's not taking somebody down, we have problems. But uh, all of these trained men firing, I don't know, more than 1,000 rounds per minute, that's a lot of lead. And after the giant fell, they started to notice more about him. Again, the scarlet red hair and beard. He had 6 fingers and 6 toes, the 2 rows of teeth, and was dressed in ragged animal skins. So if that's not wild enough for you, it gets even more wild. As that unit called it in, a Chinook helicopter was sent in, not to pull the team out, but to recover this body. And the body was loaded onto the helicopter. The men massively struggled to even get the body onto the helicopter, saying that it weighed like 1,000 pounds, and the helicopter even had to make adjustments due to the heavy load. Later, one of the helicopter crew came forward and confirmed this story, saying he was on the Chinook that picked up this large load in the mountains of Kandahar. While it was mostly covered inside the helicopter, everyone could see it was large, like a man, had red hair, 6 fingers, all of that. They flew it to Germany, where it was then transferred to Patterson. And, that is the giant story of Kandahar in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's a good story. It's so many details. And it's from modern times. What was that? That was like what, back in 2002? And I believe that to be like 100% plausible. And it's kind of interesting that its final destination was the Patterson Air Force Base. And we know the wild rumors of Patterson, all the high tech, super fringe things wind up there, UFOs, everything that you just can't explain, it goes to Patterson. And so, if you want to know more about the Giant of Kandahar, you can find so many good retellings of it online. I think Mr. Ballin does a good one on it. But the government denies, that any of these events happened. The team is said to have signed an NDA, so there's no real surprise in that. But I 100% believe that it's plausible that this happened, and there are other accounts of men who were in Afghanistan and were in the Middle East that have more tales of, these whispers of the locals of the giants that lived in the mountains.
If the government said it didn't happen, then we got to believe that, Mary. We're just telling the stories and giving our opinions here, but I agree, 100% plausible. It happened.
Oh, yeah, 100% it did. And since we're in Afghanistan in the early 2000s, why don't we just go ahead and say that the U.S. went in and stole the body of Gilgamesh too, right?
Oh, what?
Totally plausible. Yeah, so a year after that incident in Kandahar in 2003, while we were still in the Middle East for Operation Enduring Freedom, the BBC published an article that claimed that they had found the tomb of King Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, for anybody who doesn't know who he was a giant of renown, and he is actually found in the oldest recorded history ever found anywhere, and that is called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Basically, the story tells of his life. He was a giant. He was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, and his rule was beyond anything that humans had ever seen. And so it said that the gods were a little bit jealous of him, so they tried to tamper him down. And so they created for him a wild foe, and this foe was called Enkidu. And Enkidu and Gilgamesh have this epic battle, and they're fighting and fighting, but they're the perfect match. They are like equals in all ways. So, since they couldn't defeat each other, this great friendship begins between the two of them, like none other. So, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, they have these great epic adventures and they go and do these wild things, but eventually, Enkidu is killed and Gilgamesh mourns the loss of his best friend. It's said that he holds on to his body until a worm falls out of his nose. And so then Gilgamesh allows him to be buried. But this starts something inside of Gilgamesh, and he begins to fear dying. So he sets out alone, and he's trying to find eternal life. And he never does. And it's a fascinating tale. I highly recommend looking up the Epic of Gilgamesh. But anyway, like 2 weeks after this article in 2003 is published, the site where these architects are digging becomes part of a war zone. The scientists and the workers are all escorted away, and the U.S. makes a camp around the sites. Okay, so locals claim that at night they could see the military digging and taking large truckloads away from the site. And that site, it's never been excavated any further to this day. So Fassbender, who was published, who had the quote that the article in the BBC was about, who was originally so convinced that this was the site of Gilgamesh and his burial because it matched all of the key identifying markers that were found, he just stopped saying that it was the site. So again, why stop digging at a site that you were so convinced was actually the site of King Gilgamesh? Was it because we took everything? Interestingly enough, back in 2018, there was a FOIA release from the State Department in some emails that allegedly claimed that somebody was requesting the documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh and the location of his body and the location of the buried Nephilim. But, the fact checkers are going to say that that's never true. So, they say there was no burial site found. But again, newspaper articles say otherwise. You can go find that BBC article that says that they were pretty sure that they had found the tomb of the great King Gilgamesh.
Well, if the government was involved in any way and the fact checkers say no, it's got to be real.
Yeah, well, anyway, getting off topic here, but if you haven't yet, please be sure to save this episode and subscribe so you won't miss a new one, and rate us, and please share our podcast with your friends, coworkers, and strangers. We appreciate you, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
Are we done already? I think we could have like 5 episodes on giants. I still have lots of stories.
But, I was thinking we could do another episode on giants, and maybe we'll come back and tell some of the tales of other countries, because we just barely scratched the surface of the Nephilim and the giants.
Yeah, exactly. Like the giants of Solomon Island, who were said to rip men apart and eat them alive.
Yeah, I forgot about those. The ones in Guadalcanal. Yes. But, I think for now, we probably should wrap this episode up.
All right, then. Just remember, everyone, when life gets in the fringe and things look a little blurry, just remember to pull it back to Jesus.
That's excellent advice, Haley, and we love it. I hope everyone has a great week.
Wait, Mary, what is next time?
Haley, we are going to tackle demons.
Ooh, that's going to be a good one.
Yep. All right, everybody. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.